You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again, and today, man, we have another amazing show lined up for you. Today, we're going to talk to Scott Schara, and he is someone that is going to share with us a powerful story, and we're going to just learn about him, and we're going to talk about today's topic about his daughter Grace, and it's about a father's fight against a hospital that killed his daughter with Down syndrome. We're going to learn about what that story is all about. But first, I want to welcome you to the show, to I Am Refocused Radio. Scott, how you doing, sir?
Well, I'm actually doing okay. Thanks for asking, and it is sure a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So, man, first and foremost, this show topic is going to be about a painful loss, but you are going to walk us through what all this happened, how it happened, and where it took place, and what is the story behind your daughter Grace, who was a 19-year-old with Down syndrome that was killed by the actions of unethical medical personnel. So first and foremost, my heart to you and your family, and tell us a little bit about your daughter Grace.
Well, thanks for that, Grace. I could talk for the whole time and more. I mean, she was a gift from God. We named her Grace after God's grace, and interestingly, as I think back to how she came into this world, it's similar to how she left, because as she came into this world, I was in the delivery room with my wife, and I said, "You know what? I think our daughter has Down syndrome." Yeah, we had no idea because we didn't do any of the testing or anything like that young people do. But then the doctors had a meeting and came in a couple hours later and said, "We suspect your daughter has Down syndrome. Do you want to keep her?" And this was not to abort her at that point. Obviously, she was already born, but it was an attitude that we wouldn't want her. And of course, we wanted her. I mean, she was the best physical gift God ever gave us. And boy, she lived up to her name. She loved our Lord, and she called me earthly dad. She called my wife earthly mom. She was extremely high functioning. I taught her to drive a car. My wife taught her how to read and write. She played violin at my daughter Jessica's wedding. And she was incredibly funny, and she just had a humor side of her that it came about with everybody she met. If she met you for the first time, she might say, "Would you like to hear one of my dirty jokes?" And you'd say, "Well, of course, I want to hear one of your dirty jokes." And then she'd say, "Well, why didn't the toilet paper cross the road?" And of course, you'd say, "I don't know. Why didn't it cross the road?" And she'd say, "Because it got stuck in the crack." So that's my little bugger, Grace. She had, people with Down syndrome are quite unique. People call their extra chromosome the love chromosome, and Grace certainly had that. She loved the way that God wants us to love, and she exemplified that behavior. And it was wonderful to have her as a daughter. She was the easiest kid to ever raise. There was no doubt that she was walking with God. So thank you for that.
And it sounds like your daughter Grace had a lot of joy inside her, and it sounds like she was full of life and really appreciate those around her. What was some of the things that she was interested in? Was she interested in any hobbies, any sports, anything that drew her and that she used to show and share her joy?
Well, she seemed to be interested in whatever the other person was interested in. So as it applies to me, for example, I enjoy hunting, and she was my hunting buddy. So, I mean, she would just do whatever the other person wanted. But as far as her as a person, the thing that she took the most interest in was her love of Elvis Presley. She just became a big time Elvis fan, and so much so that she wrote a fan letter to Elvis's wife, Priscilla. And as God would orchestrate things, Priscilla called Grace and invited us to Graceland. And so we took the trip and and got a personal meeting with her, and the two of them became friends, which is quite a story even by itself.
Well, once again, we're talking to Scott Schara and about his daughter Grace and a tragic situation that happened. But it sounds like to you, coming from you, that she had a life that touched many people, and we will celebrate that and focus on that. But tell the audience the situation that we're going to be talking about that caused this pain, and take us back to what happened.
So this was back in last October. Grace had COVID, and she ended up not being able to maintain her oxygen saturation above 90% on October 6th. And we perceived that as an emergency. She was in the high 80s. The frontline doctors had recommended that if you can't maintain 94% or above, that it's serious. So we ended up taking her to urgent care. They did some blood work. She had a high D-dimer, which is a blood chemistry parameter that says you have a propensity to clot. So they wanted us to take her by ambulance, which we did, to the emergency room. They did a CT scan. She was negative for clots. The emergency room physician suggested that we check Grace into the hospital for 3 or 4 days to put her on oxygen and a steroid to stabilize her. Grace was fine. I mean, she was really normal at that time. She wasn't gasping for air or anything, but we just thought it was the right thing to do as far as a precaution. And unfortunately, we trusted the white coats to do what was right. And what happened after that was a series of events that ended up killing her. And ultimately, I have concluded that I believe she was murdered. And I say that with a degree of confidence because at the point I made that decision, which was in April, I had about 500 hours of research in. And on top of that, 3 days after Grace died, I went to a different hospital, and I was significantly worse than Grace. I just about died the first night. And with the same symptoms, COVID symptoms. But what ended up happening is that hospital did not follow the protocol of the hospital that Grace was in, and they turned me around in 24 hours. So what happened in the hospital with Grace is, the first day was normal. We had there's a lot of issues with care. I'll just hit a couple of them so you get a perspective. But the second day, the doctor came in and said, you need to put your daughter on a ventilator in the next 2 hours. And I said, what is that based on? And he said, well, we did a blood gas draw last evening and the numbers are not good. And I said, well, what time did you do the blood gas draw? And he told me, and that didn't line up well with how Grace was feeling during that time, because I was watching, I was paying attention. And so I said, I think you need to redo those numbers. And they did, and Grace was fine. So they would have put her on a ventilator then. Well, a ventilator, I researched it while I was in the hospital with her. I researched the ventilator and found out that the ventilator has a 90% kill rate. So you don't want somebody on a ventilator with COVID. It's not a tool for COVID. It's only a tool for COVID because the government is dictating that tool to be used. And so it was very frustrating. And then they pestered us 4 more times after that to give them a pre-authorization or a pre-approval to put Grace on a ventilator. Well, Grace didn't need a ventilator no more than she needed a hole in the head. But after Grace died, I dug into the financial piece, follow the money, and I found out that the hospital receives approximately $300,000 if they can convince the patient or their advocate to be put on a ventilator. So that's why they were chasing us down to do this. Then another situation happened the next day, which was October 9th. Grace was hungry. I ordered food, started to feed her, and the nurse came running in and said, you can't do that. I said, what's the reason? And she said her oxygen saturation is only at 85%. And so I thought, well, this is strange. I mean, Grace is doing fine. And she was in the high 90s when she was on a regular cannula just a couple of days ago. So I had my COVID materials in the room, which included my own oxygen saturation meter. So I put it on Grace's finger and it read 95%. So I called the nurse back in and asked her if my finger monitor was accurate. And she confirmed that it was. So then I asked her, well, what's the reason that your expensive monitor is reading only 85% while my $50 meter is reading accurately? And she explained that the leads get sweaty. And so I said, if you know that, why don't you proactively change the leads, given that oxygen saturation is the primary statistic you're using to make decisions on my daughter's care? And she snottily responded to me, you should just be thankful you caught this. So these things were happening. Those are two high points. I mean, there was multiple things where I was challenging the care, so much so that on October 10th, which was a Sunday morning at 7:00 in the morning, the head nurse came in with an armed guard, and ultimately I got escorted out of the building. So then we had 44 hours without advocacy. During that time, they increased a dose of sedation med called Precedex 7 different times. We had to hire an attorney to get my daughter Jessica in as a replacement advocate. My wife couldn't do so because she had COVID. So when Jessica got in the room, just a funny side story with just typical Grace, Jessica was gowned up, and so Grace couldn't recognize her. And so they started chatting, when Jessica got in the room. And Grace said, you sound just like my big sister, Jessica. Yeah. And Jess said, well, I am your big sister, Jessica. And Grace didn't believe it because she was all gowned up. So Jessica has some tattoos and showed her the tattoos. And of course, then they hugged, and it was just great. So even though Grace was sedated, she was still herself and doing well. Her night before her last night, so October 12th was her second to last day on this earth. She sat up before she went to bed and hollered. Jessica not hollered, but I mean, she hollered through the FaceTime call. Jessica called her two boys, Grace's nephews, and Grace hollered to them, "Hi, boys." And she did it. She had to holler because she had a BiPAP mask on. So even though she had now at this point been sedated for 4 days, which we didn't know, it's hard to grasp that she was still herself. But Jessica monitored her oxygen all through the night that night. Her oxygen levels were at 98, 99%. The doctor then called Cindy and I the next morning. So this is Grace's last day. So I'm going to run through her last day pretty quick, and then you can ask as many questions as you want. So her last day started at 8:00 in the morning. This is October 13th, 2021. The doctor called us at 8. He was asking for the 5th time for our decision on this pre-approval for a ventilator. We said no. And then he switched gears and said, Grace had such a good day yesterday, we should work on nutrition. Grace was malnourished at this point because they wouldn't let me feed her, wouldn't let Jess feed her. They were only fed her a couple of protein shakes. And so we foolishly agreed to that. And I say foolishly because as I see it now, it was all set up in a timeline to take her out the last day, because this is speculation. I mean, I know obviously she died, and I know the med combinations, which is not speculation, but I personally believe that because we didn't agree to the ventilator, at that point, we rejected it 5 different times. At that point, they realized, well, we're not going to make the money on this patient like we will on the next one waiting in the emergency room. So Jessica, so now we get we approve this feeding tube because he recommends it. Grace had such a good day were his exact words. Jessica then says to the nurse, who had 14 years of ICU experience, that she was going to take a shower. And there's a shower in the room. They would not let me leave the room when I was there. And so I took showers in the room. And so the nurse said, you can't take a shower in the room. And Jessica said, well, you let my dad take a shower here. Why can't I? And she said, I don't care what we did for your dad. You'll need to go home and take a shower. So Jessica, being at least a little bit fearful that if she didn't obey her command, they'd also kick her out like they did me. She went home. She said to Grace, hey, Grace, is it okay if I go home and take a shower? I'll be back in an hour. Grace acknowledged it. So she went home. When she came back, she overheard the doctor in charge of Grace's care and the 14-year ICU nurse and another doctor say the family's not going to like this. So she said, what aren't they going to like? Well, during that hour, that she was gone, they strapped Grace down to the bed and made her go to the bathroom in the bed, and then used that as an excuse to increase the sedation drug. And at 10:48 in the morning, she was at near max dose of that drug. It was 14 times the dose they started on her 4.5 days earlier. So she's really starting to get out of it. At 11:25, they then gave her a dose of lorazepam, which is an anti-anxiety med, which makes no sense. There's no anxiety whatsoever. So why would you be giving her a med like that? Then they insert the feeding tube at 11:37. They don't start feeding her until 1:59. At this point, Grace is knocked out. At 5:46, they gave her another dose of lorazepam. 3 minutes later, another dose of lorazepam. And at 6:15, they gave her a 2 milligram dose of morphine as an IV push. So in 29 minutes, she had those 3 meds in her system that would have taken you and I out. So that became the second cause of death. The first cause of death was this drug called Precedex. There's 3 causes of death here, which makes Grace's story so egregious you can't make it up. So the first one was using this drug called Precedex. That drug is only supposed to be used for 24 hours. They used it for 4.5 days. That drug specifically causes acute respiratory failure, which was listed as the first cause of death on Grace's death certificate. The second cause of death was listed as COVID-19 pneumonia. The second cause of death was this combination of 3 meds in 29 minutes, Precedex, lorazepam, and morphine. The package insert for morphine says to not combine those meds because they're contraindicated and cause death. If you do, you're supposed to have the reversal drug bedside and monitor the patient, neither of which the hospital did. In order for that med combination to take place, the doctor had to order the meds, the pharmacist had to sign off. Because those meds are contraindicated, the alarm had to be shut off, and a 14-year ICU nurse had to make a conscious decision to deliver meds that she knew would kill my daughter. And the third cause of death is the worst. So now at 6:15, the morphine was given to Grace. At 7:20, Jessica called us panicking on a FaceTime call. And she said, "Dad, Grace's numbers are dropping like crazy." I said, "Get the nurses in." And she said, "I've been trying, they won't come in." So we start screaming. She just estimated 30 nurses in the hallway at this point because of shift change. So we start screaming, "Save our daughter." And they holler back, "She's DNR, do not resuscitate." And we holler, "She's not DNR, save our daughter." We watched her die on FaceTime at 7:27, 7 minutes later. We found out after the fact, Tom Renz is involved with our case, a medical malpractice nurse, reviewed the records. She requested more records, and we found out the doctor put an illegal DNR order on Grace's life 8 minutes after they had near max dosed out the sedation drug of Precedex that morning of her last day. And we found out that evening from Jessica that there was an armed guard posted outside the room, presumably to let any nurse with a conscience come in and save our daughter. That evening, then after Grace was taken out by the funeral director, our pastor walked Cindy out in a wheelchair, and one of the nurses had Grace's belongings on a cart and leaned down and said to my wife, "Mrs. Schara, me and several of the nurses don't think Grace should have died today." And, that clue led us to all of this. And, Grace's death is 11 months ago on September 13th. And now, we've been doing this full time. I have over 200 interviews, and we're trying to get this message out to wake people up. This is a huge deal. I mean, to think that somebody would be killed in a hospital on purpose, and this is becoming the standard of care. This end-of-life meds and DNRs are the standard of care in the UK already, and I'm here to tell you this is becoming the standard of care in the United States. We have a number of people who have reached out to us, some stories more egregious than Grace's. Hundreds of thousands of people have died in hospitals of, at a minimum, suspicious and at a maximum murderous protocols. And this is why we're taking the time, including right now, to share the message.
Once again, listen to Iron Refocus Radio, talking to our guests, Scott, Sarah, and all I can say is, man, I mean, it's hard to even start where to ask questions, except for the fact one thing that really stuck out when you said there at point of time, was it just one nurse or was it a couple of nurses or a few nurses that told your wife that they felt that there were some red flags? Was it just one individual or was it a few?
It was one, the one that had Grace's belongings on the cart. She just referenced, she said me and several of the other nurses. So we know at least several know. I mean, our case has gotten so much attention that it still shocks me that none of them have come forward and contacted us. But there is an awful lot of pressure. People do not realize what is really going on. People are getting fired in their jobs if they're in the medical profession for not following protocols, for being whistleblowers. This is a very nefarious time that we're in.
And with that said, because I want to make a big disclaimer on the show, I'm just asking the questions. I'm not no medical expert or anything like that. I'm just asking Scott the questions. What was the next step for you and your wife? Were you able to get any kind of support and legal help, or just what was the process to try to really find out what happened? Like, what to find out the bottom line of what actually happened? What was that process like? And I'm sure, is this also a ongoing process that you're still dealing with to find out the bottom line of the truth?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I believe we have the truth now, but that took quite a bit of time. Then the doctor who Cindy and I have known since high school, we were classmates. She encouraged me to get the records right away. After I got out of the hospital, she called and said, "Scott, you really need to get these records." So I did a records request. We see God's hand just in that records request, because I was able to get the records to review Grace's case in 3 days after I sent in the request. So then by November 8th, so Grace died on October 13th. By November 8th, we had gone through the records in enough detail to know that she was killed. The process they used killed her. So at that point, we simply thought that Grace's death was an anomaly and the hospital would want to know. So we summarized everything, sent everything via email to the hospital, requesting a meeting with the CEO and the doctor. And, I just thought that's my biblical responsibility to request this meeting. That looked to us that they killed her. In fact, we thought they wronged us, but you never thought there was an agenda behind it. Ultimately, they got a hold of us via email on December 2nd, 3 weeks later, and said, "We are not going to meet with you." And so I felt that, that door was open then to take it to the next step, which at that point we filed claims with the state agency that regulates hospitals and the state agency that regulates doctors. And then I sent a 2-paragraph summary of Grace's case to Newsmax and Fox. Well, Newsmax contacted me the following week, and I was on national television telling the story a week later. And then that opened up this whole media opportunity to share the story worldwide. The case that we, the complaint that we filed with the 2 agencies, to my surprise, at the end of January and the beginning of February, we received letters from each agency separately. And they said they did investigations on the doctor and the hospital. And I had sent them all my research. At this point, I had a couple hundred hours of research. Now I have over 700 hours of research. So, I mean, I've got my arms around this case. But at that point, they sent us these letters and said the doctor and, they did nothing wrong. So I was in shock. I thought, you got to be kidding me. With everything I sent you, you come back and they did nothing wrong, including putting a DNR order on somebody. So I started digging into the state statutes and found out the state statutes along with the money trail. And I found out, oh my gosh, there's a government agenda behind this whole COVID situation to incentivize hospitals to follow protocols that kill people. And so obviously the complaints I filed were with government agencies. And so I realized they're all in on this. The agencies have to give them a free pass in order to accomplish this agenda. And that opened up all kinds of new research to figure out what's going on. And by April, I had concluded that Grace was murdered, as I said earlier.
And this kind of makes me think about that one nurse that spoke to your wife. Has she been able to provide any kind of statement or provide any kind of material that backs up her red flag that she felt something wasn't normal, something wasn't right?
Well, we've been fortunate to meet Tom Renz in this process, and we've given her name. We know who it is. We don't know her personally, but because we have a list of all the doctors and nurses from the records, we were able to piece it together who this nurse was. And so, eventually it's going to come out, but she has not come forward, which is a shock to me.
Yeah.
So a person that, they're equally guilty. They're a party to this crime. If you're not coming forward and stopping it, people are still being killed every single day.
Wow. This sounds like a situation that is still more room to find the truth of everything, because the record will come out, and hopefully sooner than later this can be resolved. With that said, what do you say to parents out there, and with your experience, uh, things that they should pay attention to whenever they have their child in the hospital? What are some of the things that you will suggest that parents should pay attention to, and how to stay involved?
Well, the most important thing is change your belief. So, I went into the hospital with the belief that you can trust the white coat. And there's, of course, some you can trust, but make them earn your trust. Don't blindly trust. Grace died. If I put the entire onus on me, she died because I trusted the white coat. And I don't want anybody to lose their best buddy because they trust the white coat. So absolutely do not trust the white coat. And I would also say the only time to take your loved one to the hospital is if it's objectively necessary. But otherwise, do anything in your power to not take them to the hospital. If you do need to take your loved one to the hospital, do not, under any circumstances, let them convince you that you should not be an advocate. And if you don't think you're qualified to be an advocate, hire one. We have links on Grace's website, ouramazinggrace.net, that there's professional advocates who can help. But if you believe you're qualified to be an advocate, insist, and in writing. So don't just sign the hospital admission papers, insist in writing as part of the admission process that they provide informed consent with every single step of the process, every single one. And if they acknowledge that and agree to it, hold them to it. If you find out that they are not doing it, then take your loved one out of that hospital and get them to one that will follow your directions. You are the one in charge of your loved one, not the medical establishment.
Once again, listen to iRefocus Radio, talking to Scott, Schara, and you have a funding that I want to shed light on. You have a funding in the honor of your daughter Grace. Is on givesendgo.com. Can you tell us about this campaign that you created and the purpose of this campaign?
So the Give, Send, Go link is also on Grace's website under the How Can You Help tab on ouramazinggrace.net. And the purpose is threefold. Number one is we're doing an awful lot of work right now. We have 17 billboards up and all the work with getting the message out. So there's costs associated with that. We have the legal situation that's in play right now. There's costs associated with that. The bigger opportunity is coming, which we started a 501c3 as a charitable foundation in honor of Grace to help other kids who have didn't have the same opportunities or don't have the same opportunities as Grace had. And so that's, after everything shakes out with Grace's case, that's where we see things going. So thanks for bringing that up.
And in wrapping this up, I want to make this super clear for the audience. I want to make sure I do a good enough job to make sure I'm understanding everything that you've said in this interview. So with everything that you are saying, is it your belief, and do you have it, is it an ongoing process of you trying to prove that your daughter was given certain drugs that led to her overdose. Is that basically the foundation of the situation that you're trying to shed light on and get to the bottom of?
Well, the legal case presumably will get to the bottom of that. We're really moved on from that because we have all the evidence, so there's nothing else to prove.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose of the legal case is to stop the behavior. We're not going to take any money. We're going to plow it back into the funds to help other people pursue justice. But where this is going now is what's the reason behind it? And, as of late, what I've been doing is sharing the connection that we are at the tip of the iceberg of a worldwide Holocaust. And if you look on Grace's website, the newest information is under the Holocaust tab, where there's a line-by-line comparison with what happened during World War II and what's happening now. This has become a much bigger case than just Grace's case and justice regarding her death. It's become trying to wake the population up so that people can see what's happening. I cannot believe how much I have been personally programmed to believe lies, and now that I start seeing things, it's become a pursuit that is insatiable. And so that's what's happening now, is to help other people connect the dots as to what's happening, and that we are in a time that we've never been in before. We are in a time like in the days of Noah, and it's time to wake up, get right with God. If you're not right with him, and if you are right with him, spend some time researching what I'm saying. Look on Grace's website. We have all kinds of links, but spend some time and get yourself educated.
Once again, I'm Refocus Radio talking to Scott Schara, and I want to say thank you for just saying what you said in this interview and sharing your perspective and your story with your daughter Grace. Once again, hope we can celebrate her life and her happy memories to live on and to be pushed forward. Once again, people can go to the website you mentioned, ouramazinggrace.net, to find out all information. They can check out the funding campaign at giveandsendgo.com. That's givesendgo.com. That's also on the website, ouramazinggrace.net, for the audience to learn more about Grace and your story. Once again, I want to say thank you for doing this. I can't imagine. I won't even put into words what I might think, but I just know that it takes a lot of strength and courage for someone to do something like this. And I wish you the very best for you and your family to get everything that you need, resources, and hopefully people listening will support you and your family in ways that is appropriate. So I just want to say thank you for your time.
Well, it's been an honor and a privilege to be here, and God is the one doing it. I don't have the strength on my own. He has been wonderful through this whole process.
Last thing I'll say is stay encouraged and keep the faith. Never give up, because I believe your daughter Grace will want you to keep fighting. So thank you, Scott, for your time, man. It's an honor to have you to share your story and shed light to us.
Well, thank you very much.